This video is audio content only. It does not contain any video footage or images. If you are expecting visual content, please be aware. This is intentionally provided in an audio-only format. We recommend listening to the audio rather than watching the screen. Thank you for your understanding. Welcome to Kaidan 13. Step softly into the space where the mundane meets the inexplicable. These are the cold, damp remnants of truths that refuse to stay buried, lingering in the reflection of a dark mirror, the red glow of a mountain lake, and the rhythmic scratching of a pen in the dead of night. These stories exist in the corners of your vision, where reality begins to fray. Listen closely, but be warned. Once you invite these echoes in, they may never truly leave you. Chapter 1. The Lights from the Deep. It happened back when I was still in college. I decided to take advantage of my summer break to visit a small town deep in the mountains where my friend Sam grew up. I was burnt out from the constant noise and stress of the city and thought a change of scenery would do me some good. Looking back, I realize I never should have gone. Sam's hometown sat in a narrow valley hemmed in by steep ridges and a massive, dark lake. Even in the middle of the day, the shadows from the mountains felt heavy, and the air had a damp, clinging quality to it. The moment I stepped off the bus, the sound of water hit me. Not the drone of the summer insects, but a constant, distant rushing. Dozens of creeks fed into the valley, all of them pouring into that one deep lake. "Not much to look at, is it?" Sam said with a grin when he met me. But behind that smile, I could tell he felt a little uneasy, like he was hiding a secret about the place he'd left behind for the city. The town was tiny. You could walk the whole loop in under an hour. It was a row of weathered clapboard houses and a main street where you'd hardly see a soul. By sunset, the place went dead quiet, like even the stray dogs had gone into hiding. "There is nothing to do here after dark," Sam told me. "If you want to kill time, the lake is the only spot." There were stories about that lake, old ones that had been passed down for generations. People said that on summer nights, a strange red glow would drift across the center of the water. The locals called it the lights from the deep. They feared it, warning their children to stay away from the shore after dark. They believed the lights were the souls of those who had drowned, rising up from the silt to find a way out. That night, Sam, his cousin Mia, and I headed down to the water. Mia was a freshman at a university in the city, and she seemed on edge. "Do you think we will actually see something?" she asked, her hand trembling slightly as she gripped her flashlight. When we reached the shore, the moonlight turned the surface of the water a pale, ghostly blue. There was not a breath of wind. The only sound was the rhythmic chirping of crickets in the tall grass. I held my breath, staring out into the darkness. After a few minutes, a flicker of red appeared in the middle of the lake. At first, it looked like a small ember, but it grew larger, swaying back and forth as it drifted toward us. "It is real," I whispered, unable to look away. Beneath the glow, I could see shadows beneath the surface, distorted shapes that looked like human faces. They were pale and bloated, mouths hanging open in silent screams, trailing bubbles as they sank back down. Every time one vanished, the light would flicker and reappear somewhere else. It was not just one face. There were dozens of them. "We have to go," Sam yelled, and we turned and bolted back toward the house. The next morning, we told Sam's grandmother what we had seen. She sighed heavily and sat us down. "There was a terrible disaster at that lake a long time ago," she said quietly. "A massive mudslide came roaring down the mountain after a storm. It buried half the old village and swept dozens of people into the water. The bodies were never recovered. They are still down there in the muck. Those lights are their spirits. You should not have looked." Sam and Mia went quiet. I tried to play it off like it did not bother me, but I could feel a cold sweat soaking through my shirt. That night, as I lay in bed at the guest house, I heard a wet, splashing sound right by my ear. My eyes snapped open. Outside the window, a red glow was hovering in the air. My heart froze. The light drifted closer to the glass, and a face peered in from the darkness. A waterlogged, gray face, the same one I had seen in the lake. I screamed, and the next thing I knew, it was morning. There was nothing outside the window, but the carpet near the sill was soaking wet. Mia looked pale at breakfast. She leaned in and whispered to us, "I had a dream last night. I was at the bottom of the lake, and there were so many people down there. They were all reaching out for me, calling my name." We did not talk about the lake after that, but on the day we were supposed to leave, I found myself walking back to the shore one last time. In the daylight, it looked perfectly ordinary, just a quiet, still body of water. Then I noticed an old stone monument tucked away in the weeds. I brushed off the moss and read the inscription. August 17th, 1954. In memory of the 38 villagers lost to the flood. May they rest in peace. A chill ran down my spine. 38. It matched the swarm of faces I had seen in the water. Even after the summer ended and I went back to the city, the red light did not leave me. I see it at night, not just near water, but reflecting off the pavement, in the windows of the subway, or in the corner of my bathroom mirror. It flickers for just a second, and for a heartbeat, I see a wet, bloated face staring back. Every time it happens, I remember the souls trapped at the bottom of that lake. What the people in that town call the lights from the deep isn't just a legend. They are still down there, and they are still looking for someone to join them. Chapter 2. The Weeping Mirror. I moved into a cramped, run-down dormitory right after I started college. The building was ancient, with yellowing wallpaper peeling away in the corners and a lingering smell of dust and old wood. But the rent was dirt cheap, and it was within walking distance of my classes, so I signed the lease without a second thought. A few days after moving in, I was cleaning out the deep, dark closet in the back of the room when I found it, a full-length mirror tucked away behind a heavy moth-eaten cloth. The frame was made of dark wood, carved with intricate, swirling patterns that looked almost like twisting vines. The glass itself was cloudy, reflecting the light with a dull, sickly sheen, as if it were absorbing the brightness of the room rather than reflecting it. A few nights later, some friends came over to see the new place. When I showed them the mirror, one of them, a girl named Chloe, turned pale. "I've heard stories about the mirrors left behind in these old dorms," she whispered. "They say some of them are haunted. They call it the weeping mirror. If you look into it at the right time of night, you can hear someone crying from the other side." I laughed it off, but I couldn't deny I was curious. We decided to test it out, mostly as a joke. We killed the lights and set a single candle on the floor in front of the glass. I knelt down and whispered into the dark. "Is there someone there? Let us hear you cry." For a long time, nothing happened. Then the candle flame began to flicker violently, though there wasn't a draft in the room. The air grew heavy and cold, pressing down on my chest. I strained my ears, and from somewhere deep within the mirror, I heard it, a faint, rhythmic sobbing. It sounded like a little girl, lost and terrified. I saw something white move in the depths of the glass, a pale shape drifting closer. Chloe shrieked, knocking the candle over as she scrambled back. In the sudden pitch black, we all panicked, laughing nervously as we flipped the lights back on and agreed to stop. But after they left, the room didn't feel empty anymore. That night, I heard a slow, steady drip-drop coming from the ceiling, even though there were no pipes above me. When I closed my eyes to sleep, the sobbing returned, whispering right against my ear. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw small, dark shadows darting across the walls, shapes that shouldn't have been there. I tried to tell myself I was just tired, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger with each passing hour. On the third night, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My reflection was weeping. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a trick of the light, but when I pulled my hands away, my cheeks were actually wet. Behind my reflection, a blurry white figure was swaying in the darkness of the room. I lived alone. There was no one else there. Terror finally took hold. I grabbed the old cloth, threw it over the mirror, and prepared to drag it out to the hallway to get rid of it for good. But as I lifted it, I saw a hand, pale, gray, and bloated, reach out from the surface of the glass and grab the edge of the frame. It wasn't a reflection. It was reaching into my world. I screamed and slammed the mirror face down onto the hardwood floor. It shattered with a deafening, hollow crack. In that instant, every light in the room blew out. A wave of agonizing, ear-piercing screams filled the air, so loud I had to cover my ears. Just before the darkness swallowed me whole, I felt something ice-cold and wet clamp firmly around my ankle. When my friends came to check on me the next morning, they found the room in shambles. Shards of glass were scattered across the floor like jagged teeth. On the largest pieces, the words "Help me" were scrawled in a dark, brownish-red stain that looked like dried blood. But the most terrifying part was the reflection. In every single broken shard of glass, my face was staring back, but it wasn't me. The girl in the glass was sobbing, her eyes red and swollen, her mouth open in a silent plea for help. My friends fled the room in a blind panic. They say that if you go back there now, you can still see that white shadow swaying among the ruins of the glass, waiting for someone to look too closely. Chapter 3. The Backward Aisle. The Backward Aisle. We reached the deserted island in a small motorboat. It did not take long to realize we were not alone, but the people there were wrong. They all walked backward, and when they spoke, the sounds were a garbled mess of reverse syllables. Yet somehow, the meaning of their words bypassed my ears and bled directly into my brain. "Did you see that?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling. "Those people, the way they move, it is like a film being played in reverse." "Are we going to be able to get out of here?" Leo asked. A chorus of laughter echoed around us, though none of the figures nearby moved their lips. Then a single command echoed in our minds, cold and absolute. One must stay. The three of us stopped dead and looked at each other. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "What do they mean, stay?" We pushed further into the brush and found an old weathered stone monument standing in the center of a clearing. The engravings were worn, but we managed to make out the words. "This isle holds 10,000 souls. Of those who visit, one shall remain. The others shall be returned to the sea." 10,000, Mark breathed. "Someone has to stay behind? You have got to be kidding me. This is some kind of sick joke." But the inhabitants were starting to close in. As they drew nearer, we saw they had no eyes, no mouths, just smooth, blank expanses of pale skin where their faces should have been. Yet I could feel the weight of 1,000 gazes pinning us to the spot. "Let us get out of here," Mark shouted. We bolted back toward the shore, but when we reached the landing, our hearts sank. The boat was lashed to a jagged rock by a heavy iron chain that had not been there before. No matter how hard we yanked, it would not budge. From the depths of the water, that same voice rang out again. "Become one, and the rest shall be returned." The meaning was clear. Unless one of us volunteered to stay, none of us would ever leave. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over us. We looked at each other, and the bond we had shared for years began to fray right before my eyes. "I have to go back," Mark snapped, his eyes wild. "My mom is having surgery next week. I am the only one working to pay for it. I cannot just disappear." "Do not give me that," Leo yelled back. "I just made a promise to someone. I am not rotting away on some rock." "Everyone just calm down," I shouted. "We all have reasons to live." Our screams collided. In seconds, the veneer of friendship was stripped away, leaving only the raw, ugly instinct to survive. "So what now?" Mark spat. "We draw straws? You want us to gamble with our lives? If we do not choose, we are all dead." Mark lunged at Leo, grabbing him by the collar. They tumbled onto the sand, kicking and clawing at each other in a desperate struggle. Behind them, the faceless inhabitants gathered in a circle, making a wet, rhythmic sound like hundreds of hands clapping underwater. Finally, Leo slumped back, panting. He looked at the ground for a long time before speaking. "I will do it," he whispered. "I will stay." Mark and I froze. "Are you sure?" I asked. Leo looked up, his eyes hollow. "My parents are gone, and my career is going nowhere. There is no one waiting for me back home anyway. If someone has to stay, it might as well be me. Just go." The inhabitants nodded in unison. In that instant, the iron chain dissolved into black mist, and the boat drifted free. "Thank you, Leo. We will never forget this," Mark sobbed, scrambling into the boat. We pushed off, tears blurring our vision as the gap between us and the shore widened. As we looked back, we saw Leo standing in the center of the island, but he was not the same. His body began to jerk and twitch, flipping and contorting until he was standing backward just like the others. In his final moment of humanity, he turned to look at us. Or rather, while his back remained toward the sea, his neck snapped around a full 180 degrees. His face was pale, his eyes gone, and a jagged, unnatural grin split his skin. "Go home," his voice echoed in our heads. The waves surged, pushing us back toward the world we knew. When I finally dared to look back, the horizon was empty. The island and our friend were gone. Chapter 4. The Community Board. I moved into a sleek 5-year-old apartment complex downtown to finally get some relief from the burnout I was feeling at work. It was right next to the subway and had top-of-the-line security. The rent was a bit of a stretch for my budget, but I figured a fresh start in a nice place was exactly what I needed. On my first night there, I headed down to the lobby to take out the trash. On my way back from the disposal area, the community board next to the elevators caught my eye. "Missing person" was printed in bold letters across several flyers. It was a little unsettling to see something like that in the middle of the night, and I felt a sudden urge to get back to the safety of my room. But my eyes locked on to one specific flyer, and the breath left my lungs. The person in the photo was me. It was a shot taken from behind in my office lobby. I was in my suit, and you could clearly see my profile from the side. Underneath the photo, it read, "Resident of Unit 402 missing. Please contact with any information." That was my room, the unit I had just moved into that afternoon. At first, I tried to tell myself it was some kind of sick joke, but I couldn't sleep a wink that night. As soon as the sun came up, I ran down to the management office. "I'm sorry to bother you," I told the super, my voice shaking, "but last night I saw a missing person flyer on the community board, and it had my picture on it." The building manager frowned and tilted his head. "What? No, there's nothing like that on the board. What kind of photo are you talking about?" I described it to him frantically. He went quiet for a moment, looking thoughtful, before he finally spoke. "That unit is supposed to be vacant," he said slowly. A chill ran down my spine. "No, I just moved in yesterday. I signed the lease. I have the keys." The manager looked uneasy. He sat in silence for a long time before he finally whispered, "We've had a few different tenants move into that unit over the last couple of years, but every single one of them, they just vanish one day, without a trace." I went back up to my apartment, trying to keep my terror in check. My boxes were still there. My keys worked perfectly. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like the very air in the room had changed. That night, I forced myself to go back down and check the board again. The flyer from the night before was gone. In its place was a brand new sheet of paper. "We are checking on the welfare of the new tenant. Please contact us if you have any information." The photo on this one was even more detailed. It showed me from the knees down, capturing the exact pair of dress shoes I had put on at my front door before heading to work that morning. It was a picture of me from today. Chapter 5. The Ledger. David and I have been married for 10 years. He has always been a steady, serious man, The kind who doesn't say much but shows up when it counts. He doesn't cheat, he barely drinks, and he's never been one for drama. By all accounts, he was the perfect, dependable husband. But a few months ago, something shifted. He started acting strange, slipping out of bed in the middle of the night to go down to his home office. He wouldn't turn on the lights. He'd just sit there in the pale glow of the moon, scribbling furiously in a notebook. The first time I caught him, I crept down the hall and whispered his name. "What are you doing up so late, honey?" David's shoulders jerked, and he slammed the notebook shut with a frantic thud. "Just some notes for work," he said, his voice tight. He tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace, a mask stretched too thin over his face. The next morning, I found the notebook sitting right in the middle of the kitchen table, almost as if it were a centerpiece. I hesitated, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach, but curiosity won out. I opened it. 10 a.m. Folding the laundry, whites first, then darks. 2:15 p.m. Returns from the grocery store. 6 eggs in the bag. 7:32 p.m. Laughs at the sitcom, showed her teeth. It was a log of my entire day, written with clinical, terrifying precision. At first, it felt like some bizarre obsession with my routine, but as I flipped through the pages, the tone began to sour. The entries became twisted, layered with a dark, paranoid subtext. 9 p.m. Phone call. Who was she talking to? Insufficient evidence. 12 a.m. Tosses in her sleep. Turning to the right is a sign of a traitor. 3:14 a.m. Gets up for a glass of water. Did she see me? A cold chill washed over me. This wasn't just a diary. It was surveillance. He was watching my every move and projecting some hidden, treacherous meaning onto the simplest actions. The strangest part was that the notebook was there every morning, waiting for me. He wasn't trying to hide it. He wanted me to see it. A few days later, David didn't leave the book on the table. Instead, he shoved it toward me while I was drinking my coffee. "This is the proof," he said, his voice low and vibrating with a strange intensity. "It's all in here, every way you've betrayed me." "David, I haven't betrayed you. I haven't done anything," I shouted, my heart hammering against my ribs. He just let out a dry, hollow laugh. "You can't hide what you do when you aren't thinking. You might not remember, but I see everything." That night, David didn't come to bed. I lay awake, listening to the rhythmic scratch of a pen and the faint rustle of turning pages echoing from the kitchen. The next morning, the ledger was back on the table. I opened it to the newest page, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold the paper. 2:16 a.m. Stands behind me, staring. 2:17 a.m. Holding a kitchen knife. 2:18 a.m. Recorded as evidence. I will be gone soon. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I didn't do that," I whispered to the empty room. "I was in bed. I was asleep." But then a sharp, stabbing pain flared behind my eyes. A memory, or maybe a fragment of a dream, surfaced with sickening clarity. I remembered standing in the dark kitchen. I remembered the weight of the chef's knife in my hand. I remembered the back of David's head as he sat at the table, writing. The scene in my head matched the entry in the ledger perfectly. I looked up, and David was there, standing in the shadows of the hallway. He was watching me with a blank, hollow expression. "You finally realized, didn't you?" His voice was cold, sounding like it belonged to a complete stranger. "You were replaced a long time ago. Something from the other side took your place. The real her died back then." The pain in my head spiked again, and the world seemed to tilt. "I remember now," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I saw it. In the dark, I saw a shadow that looked exactly like me rise up from the bed. If that was me, then who am I?" David nodded slowly and pointed to the ledger on the table. The pages began to flutter as if caught in a draft, and the black ink started to bleed, spreading across the paper like a stain. It wasn't forming words anymore. The ink was rising, twisting into the shape of a person, a groaning silhouette that seemed to be trying to claw its way out of the paper. I couldn't look away. I couldn't move, because the outline of that shadow, shivering and dark, was the exact same shape as mine. Chapter 6. The Tide Road. I traveled to that island about 6 months ago. I was working for the state's Department of Tourism, and my boss had tasked me with visiting some of the more isolated coastal communities to put together a report on local heritage for a new travel campaign. It was a tiny fishing village, the kind of place that rarely saw a fresh face. It was a little over an hour by ferry from the mainland. Even though it was on the map, very few people ever actually set foot there. The first thing I noticed when I stepped off the boat was the silence. It wasn't that the place was empty. There were trawlers lined up at the docks and kids playing near the wharf, but no one would look me in the eye. No one smiled. There was a tension in the air that felt like a physical weight against my skin. "Welcome. You must be the man from the tourism office," the woman running the B&B said. She was the only one who spoke to me with any warmth. Her name was Martha, a woman in her 60s who carried herself with a sharp, upright dignity. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said. "I'm just here to do some research on the local traditions and history." "That's fine," she replied, her voice suddenly dropping an octave. "But if I were you, I wouldn't ask too many questions about the tide road." The sudden warning caught me off guard. "The tide road?" I asked. "We call it the tide road here," she said. "At night, if you see lights flickering out on the water, you must never follow them. It's an old law of the island." Martha wouldn't say another word on the subject. That night, looking out from my room's window, I saw them. Far out in the bay, strange lights were bobbing on the surface. There were no street lamps out there, no boats, yet a line of pale, ghostly blue glows stretched across the water like a shimmering path. The next day, I tried to bring it up casually with one of the local fishermen. "I saw some lights out on the water last night," I said. "They looked like—" The fisherman stopped mending his net and fixed me with a hard, cold stare. "You saw them?" he asked. "Yeah, they were lined up like a road." "Forget you saw a thing," he snapped. "But why?" I asked. "It's the rule," he said, his voice tight. "You follow that road, you don't come back. That's just how it is." The word rule stuck in my mind. On my third night, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my camera and headed down to the beach. The moon was bright and the sea was unnervingly calm. Then the lights appeared again. They stretched out from the shore in a perfect, glowing line, leading straight into the deep. A young man from the village was standing on the sand. His name was Caleb. "Don't do it," he said in a low, commanding voice. He wasn't talking to me. He was looking at a teenage girl, Sarah, who was standing at the water's edge. She was walking toward the lights as if she were in a trance. "Stop," Caleb said, catching up to her and grabbing her arm. "Let me go," she whispered. "Don't you want to walk the road?" "No," he said firmly. "You won't come back." I stood there, frozen, watching the struggle. Suddenly, Sarah turned and looked right at me. Her eyes were vacant, completely out of focus, as if she were looking through me at something miles away. Caleb noticed me then and barked, "You've seen enough. Strangers should keep their noses out of island business." When I got back to the B&B, Martha was waiting for me in the parlor. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to, but what is that?" "I told you not to ask," she said softly. She sat down and stared into the fireplace. "On this island, we call those the welcoming lights. Some say they are the souls of our ancestors. Others say it's something from the bottom of the ocean calling out to us. Either way, once you step onto that path, there is no turning back. Everyone born here knows the danger." "Then why was that girl?" I started. "There are always those who want to break the rules," she interrupted. "And people from the outside are in even more danger. Forget what you saw tonight." There was a coldness in her voice, but I could hear a trace of pity, too. The next morning, Sarah was nowhere to be found. When I asked Caleb about her, he just looked right through me and claimed he didn't know who I was talking about. The entire village had retreated into a wall of silence. As I boarded the ferry to head back to the mainland, I looked back at the shore one last time. Out on the water, even in the morning mist, I could see that same line of pale blue lights. But this time, standing right in the middle of the path, someone was watching me. It was a figure with long, soaking wet hair, standing perfectly still on the surface of the water. A chill like ice water ran down my spine. If I had taken just one step onto that beach the night before, I realized it wouldn't have been the girl who went missing. It would have been me. Chapter 7. The Well That Followed. When I was about 20 years old, I spent a summer visiting some distant relatives in a tiny, isolated town tucked deep in the Appalachian Mountains. My mother's side of the family lived in a small hollow where the world seemed to have stopped moving decades ago. I was burnt out from the frantic pace of college life and thought a few weeks of silence in the woods would be the perfect reset. The town was nothing more than a handful of weathered houses clustered at the end of a long, winding dirt road. The forest surrounding the valley was so dense that even at high noon, the sunlight only managed to filter through the canopy in dim, sickly patches. There were no lakes or streams nearby. Instead, the lifeblood of the community was an ancient stone well sitting right in the center of the clearing. Its rim was choked with thick, dark moss, and the heavy wooden lid was rotting and half collapsed. "Stay away from that well," my cousin Ruby told me on the day I arrived. She was a few years older than me and had lived in that hollow her entire life. Sometimes at night you can hear singing coming from down there. It sounds like children, but there's something wrong about it. Just don't go near it after dark." I didn't really believe her. It sounded like one of those local legends people tell to keep kids from falling into dangerous places. But I noticed that whenever the well was mentioned, the neighbors would immediately look away or fall silent, their faces tightening with a strange sort of dread. When night fell, a heavy, suffocating darkness settled over the valley. The only sound was the constant, low hissing of the wind through the trees. As I lay in bed, I suddenly heard a faint noise drifting in through the window. It was a clear, high-pitched voice like a young girl's, echoing from the center of the clearing. "Come here." It was exactly what Ruby had described. I held my breath, pulling the covers up to my chin. The voice drifted from the direction of the well, melodic and fragile like the tinkling of a silver bell, but it carried an underlying vibration that made my skin crawl. It was a haunting, hypnotic sound that felt like it was trying to pull me into a dream. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the sun finally came up, I walked out to the well and found a small puddle of water near the base with a faint, dark stain shaped like a human shadow trailing away from the rim. A few days later, my curiosity finally won out. During the heat of the afternoon, I crept over to the well to see what was inside. I nudged the rotting lid aside just an inch and peered down. The shaft was pitch black and seemed to drop into a bottomless void. I could see faint marks carved into the stones of the inner wall, though they were mostly obscured by slime and moss. Who ended up down there? I wondered, a cold shiver tracing its way down my spine. I tried to ask one of the town elders about it, but he just brushed me off with a grunt. Eventually, I managed to get the truth out of an old woman who lived at the edge of the woods. She told me that generations ago, back when a terrible fever had swept through the mountains, dozens of children had died. The ground was too frozen to dig graves, and the people were too weak to carry the bodies to the churchyard, so they had used the well as a mass grave. They used to hold vigils and leave offerings to keep the spirits at peace, but after the local mines closed and the town began to die out, the rituals were forgotten. The well had been drinking in the voices of those lost children ever since. One night, unable to sleep, I went out to sit on the porch. The voice came again, but this time it was much louder. It wasn't just singing anymore. It was calling my name. "Mary, Mary, come here." I was paralyzed with fear, but at the same time, I felt a sickening magnetic pull in my chest. I found myself standing up and walking toward the well as if my feet didn't belong to me. I reached the edge and looked down into the blackness. Deep in the shadows, I saw a faint, pale glimmer. It looked like a tiny, waterlogged hand reaching up from the depths. "Come here," the voice whispered, sounding like it was right against my ear. I snapped out of the trance and scrambled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. I bolted back into the house and dove under the blankets, shaking uncontrollably. That night, I dreamed of dozens of pale, bloated girls climbing up the mossy stones, their fingers scratching against the wood as they reached out to pull me down. In the dream, their voices weren't singing. They were screaming in a raw, agonizing pain that felt like it was tearing through my skull. The next morning, I told Ruby what had happened. Her face turned ashen. "I hear it too," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I've heard their songs every night since I was a little girl. I was just too scared to tell anyone." She told me the elders had a strict rule. Never look into the well. Never answer the voices. If you answer the call, your soul belongs to them. I couldn't stay there another day. I packed my bags and left for the city that afternoon. But even though I'm hundreds of miles away, the well didn't stay in the mountains. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear that faint melodic singing coming from the corner of my apartment. It's not just in my dreams anymore. I can hear it echoing in the pipes and reflecting off the windows. I'll never go back to that town, but I can feel that voice still searching for me, drifting through the dark. Whatever is sleeping at the bottom of that well isn't just a ghost. It's a hunger, fueled by forgotten prayers and a century of resentment, still rippling in the dark water, waiting for the one who answered its call. Chapter 8. The Echo in the Tunnel. I had a friend I only knew when I was in elementary school. I know I used to call him by name back then, but for the life of me, I can't remember what it was. All I have left are the memories of his face, his voice, and that sharp, damp smell of the old stone tunnel. On my way home from school, I used to take a shortcut through a weathered tunnel that ran under the old railroad tracks. Even in the middle of the day, it was dim and chilly inside. The other kids in my class avoided it, whispering stories about ghosts and urban legends, but it was the quickest way to get to my house, so I braved it every afternoon with my backpack bouncing against my shoulders. One day, as I was walking through the shadows, a voice drifted out from the darkness. "Hey there." I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. A boy about my age was standing there, leaning against the damp wall. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt and a pair of shorts. His skin looked a little pale, but he was wearing a wide, friendly grin. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The boy tilted his head and laughed. "I just play here. What about you?" "I'm heading home," I said, starting to relax. "I'll be passing through here tomorrow, too. Do you want to play then?" For some reason, saying those words made my chest feel warm. I was just a lonely kid, and the idea of having a new friend made me incredibly happy. From that day on, I met him in the tunnel every afternoon. We played tag, told each other riddles, and laughed until our sides ached over the kind of silly things only kids find funny. "Where do you live?" I asked him once. "It's a secret," he replied with a mischievous glint in his eye, "but it's a long way from here." "What about school?" "Yeah, I go," he said vaguely. "But this is my place." His answers were always a bit blurry, but I didn't push him for details. I was just happy to have someone to share those quiet afternoons with. Then, one evening, he looked unusually somber. His usual grin was gone, replaced by a look of quiet longing. "Hey," he said softly, "I might not be able to see you much longer." "Why?" I asked, a lump forming in my throat. "Are you moving away?" "Yeah, something like that," he whispered, shrugging his shoulders. "I don't want you to go," I shouted, the words bursting out of me before I could stop them. He looked at me, his eyes soft and sad. "Thanks for being my friend," he said. That smile burned itself into my memory, and for a reason I couldn't explain, I felt tears stinging my eyes. When I got home, I was still crying. My mom found me in the kitchen and asked what was wrong. When I told her about my friend in the tunnel, her expression shifted. She frowned and sat me down, her voice dropping to a whisper. Honey, that tunnel, there was a terrible accident there a long time ago. A little boy, right around your age, was hit by a car and killed. My breath hitched. It couldn't be him. The next day, I summoned every bit of courage I had and went back to the tunnel one last time. He was standing there, just like always. You came, he said. Are you dead? I asked, my voice cracking. He gave me a small, lonely smile. Yeah, I've been here all by myself for a long time, but I'm okay now. You gave me that. You made me feel okay, so I'm not lonely anymore. Thank you. He reached out and waved, his eyes shimmering with tears. As I watched, his form began to grow translucent, fading into the shadows until he dissolved like mist in a cold breeze. I stood there in the silence of the tunnel and sobbed, not out of fear, but because of a crushing sense of grief and a strange, lingering warmth. It's been over 10 years since then. The tunnel was demolished during a highway expansion, and no one walks that path anymore. But I still think about him. I know that for those few weeks, that boy was truly my friend. And even if I can never remember his name, the way he said thank you is something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The stories we share are more than just echoes of the past. They are reminders of how thin the veil truly is. We move through our lives assuming the ground is solid and our reflections are honest. Yet the shadows suggest otherwise. Whether it is a face beneath the lake or a name whispered from a well, these fragments of the unknown linger long after the silence returns. Perhaps the most unsettling thought isn't that these things exist in far-off places, but that they might be closer than we realize, waiting in the corner of a room or the static of a quiet hallway. Thank you for joining me. As you return to your world, take a moment to look a little closer at the things you take for granted. After all, not everything that follows us into the dark is a memory.